They Shall Not Grow Old is a brand new documentary from director Peter Jackson, the same guy that brought us the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And all you really need to know about this documentary is that they've taken actual footage, actual film from World War I of soldiers in the trenches and updated it to make it look a bit more natural and not modern, but a bit more authentic. And the way they've done this is through a load of different techniques, such as updating the frame rate so it doesn't look as jittery as it used to, cleaning up the overall image so it doesn't look as grainy, and most importantly, adding colour to what were black and white images. Now, for anyone who was thinking the whole idea of them taking black and white footage and then colouring it seemed a bit gimmicky, I implore you to at least give this movie a chance. Because for those of you that have actually seen the film, you will know that it is actually pretty damn effective at what it sets out to do. Because the entire first section of the movie is still in traditional black and white footage, and it's even condensed to a square, like how that film would be. It's not until the halfway point where the black and white image slowly transitions into the colour image you're expecting to see, and from there on in, it's actually some of the most touching stuff I've ever seen in a documentary. And that transition, by the way, is really, really seamless. I mean, it's quite obvious that it's going from black and white to colour, but just the way they executed it is just, it's kind of baffling on the eyes, because like you're so used to the images you're seeing in black and white, and when it does fade into the colour image, it's almost a bit like watching The Wizard of Oz for the first time, like when it goes from black and white to bright and colourful Oz. It's almost the equivalent of that, and it can be a bit jarring at first, but as the film goes on, the colour really does add to it, making you feel like you're actually looking at normal, everyday people. Because I feel like with black and white images, I get that it was, you know, at the time, and they didn't have the best, you know, camera technology in that, but it always feels very historic when you look at jittery, you know, black and white images of the war. It always seems a bit like it happened in another time. But the fact that they've done this and made it a lot cleaner, crisper, cleaned it up so that it looks more fluid and obviously coloured it, it kind of brings it into the modern day a little bit and makes it look more natural and almost actually like an ordinary war film that could be made today. There are some shots that are kind of noticeable, and you kind of have to keep thinking to yourself, this is restored film from 1914. But for the most part, if you didn't know that it was film that had been restored, you could actually think that this was actually some pretty faithful reconstructions and reenactments of stuff that happened in World War I. That's how good the restoration is in this. Also, besides the look of the movie, I also think the sound of the film is something that should be focused on as well, because there are some really interesting things that they've done to really add to the immersion of this whole, you know, experiment that they've tried to do. Because as well as, you know, the footage being restored, what Peter Jackson and co have also done is added dubbing and Foley to the coloured image you're seeing. So if you see some soldiers, you know, having a laugh or talking, some people have actually dubbed and lip-synced to the footage they are looking at. So you're actually hearing what they presumed these soldiers would sound like. And as well as obviously like the bullet sounds and the bomb sounds and, you know, little sounds like that. They've gone all out to make it feel like this is actual footage that could be filmed today. And I really like little touches like that. And on top of that, you have the voices of actual veterans talking over the top of the entire movie, explaining their experiences during World War One. It never cuts back to a mid-shot of them, and I actually like that in this film. It's a similar thing they did in the documentary Senna, where they never cut back to the person talking. It's just voices on top of already pre-existing footage, and they tried to tell the narrative that way. And here I think it does work. There isn't really a narrative per se. I just think it works in the sense that, for example, one of the veterans will be talking about a specific thing they used to do, like on the one day where there wasn't anything happening, they would just like play football behind the trenches. And you actually see footage of some soldiers playing football in the trenches. So it's like the correlation of what they're saying to what you're seeing. I think it works in that sense. And again, some of the stuff they come out with is actually quite poignant and quite eye-opening in some degree, because I was seeing that this is a war documentary, I was expecting it to be of the depressing side, but actually, for the majority of the film, these people sounded actually quite optimistic. When they went to the war, they just saw it as another thing to do. They never thought of it as a really bad thing that they were hesitant in doing. If anything, there's even some points where the soldiers didn't want to go back home. They actually enjoyed their time there. They enjoyed the camaraderie, and they thought it was a nice thing to get away from their normal everyday lives. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective to go for this documentary. It's not just all doom and gloom. They were actually incredibly optimistic people out there, and they had a completely different viewpoint on the war than, say, a lot of war films nowadays perceive that war to be. I mean, it was still a terrible thing that caused millions and millions of people to die, but I just think that hearing their perspective on the whole thing, the fact that it wasn't entirely negative, it was actually kind of uplifting in a sense, kind of adds a new angle on soldiers and the whole war in general that I really wasn't expecting from this movie. What Peter Jackson has done here is something truly amazing. He's taken something that happened about 100 years ago and made it feel more relevant and human than probably any Hollywoodized war film would ever probably do. And that's saying something, because there's a lot of war films out there that I like. But after watching this documentary and the certain angles and perspectives that people actually had in the war, after hearing their actual experiences, kind of makes you think how over-dramatized modern war films are, or just most war films are. And I think that contrast is something that can be looked at quite a lot in years to come, comparing what it was actually like by using this documentary and then comparing to what people think it was like with films like, say, I don't know, Saving Private Ryan or Hacksaw Ridge. Two films that I do really like. But I just think that contrast is something that is both interesting to look at and something that I think needs to be looked at. This was a very touching documentary that I think everyone should watch at least once in their life, mainly because it adds a completely new perspective on the war that I don't think you would ever initially expect from going into the documentary in the first place. And it's that reason, as well as all the technical things, which is why I'm going to give They Shall Not Grow Old an 8.5 out of 10. Again, I highly recommend you check this one out if you get the chance. There's a lot of things in this documentary that are quite eye-opening in some regards, because you would never think people acted this way, or you would never think certain things played out like they did after watching certain war films. After watching this documentary, you kind of get a different angle on it that makes the whole thing just that bit more relatable. So guys, that was my review of They Shall Not Grow Old. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye!